I still remember that night. The kind of night a man never forgets. The sky over Normandy was alive with light, thousands of headlights cutting through the mist, stretching farther than the eye could see. It looked like the whole of France had turned into one great moving factory. My name is Corporal James Red Williams, 22 years old, 3rd Quartermaster Truck Company, US Army, an African-American driver in a segregated outfit. I drove a GMC CW, what we called the Deuce and a Half. She wasn't much to look at, but she was built like a tank and smelled of oil, rubber and gasoline, my kind of perfume. That evening the order came down. We were to drive 20 hours a day, no stopping except for fuel or emergencies. Headlights on at night, something no sane army ever did. 2 one-way roads, one going east with loaded trucks, one west with empties. Military police would pull out any truck that dropped under 25 miles an hour. The brass called it the Red Ball Express, and even the name sounded reckless, like we were signing up to chase fire itself. The idea of nearly 6,000 trucks running non-stop through the dark French countryside seemed crazy. Every man knew it. You could see it in the way we tightened our gloves, glanced at each other, then back at the endless line of trucks ahead. The engines started one after another until the whole earth seemed to hum. We didn't know if we'd make it, only that someone had decided it had to be done. I remember the first few miles, the rattle of the cab, the smell of exhaust thick as fog, and the glare of those white beams bouncing off the wet road. I gripped the wheel so hard my hands cramped, but somewhere in that noise and light the fear burned away. We weren't just hauling gas and ammo, we were hauling a nation's promise. Behind us were the beaches of Normandy, ahead Patton's tanks waiting for fuel. They said no army could move that fast, that it couldn't be done. But that night, as our convoy rolled east and the countryside glowed under 6,000 moving lights, I swear the world itself began to turn with us. Our wheels answered louder than words. Rumours travel faster than convoys. After a few days on the road, the talk started creeping down the line. Patton will stop in 2 days. He'll be out of gas. Nobody knew where it came from, but soon you could hear it everywhere. From the mess tents, from the mechanics, even from the radio we kept tuned low in the cab. The German broadcast called out names like Jodl and Westphal, men who thought they'd figured us out. They said Patton's Third Army had raced 400 miles from the beaches, and no army on earth could keep that pace. One of their generals bragged, "An armoured division burns 150,000 gallons a day. At this distance they'll stop in 48 hours. Sitting behind the wheel, I remember watching the fuel gauge shiver on the red line and wondering if they were right. We'd driven for days, the trucks growling through mud and broken roads, each one loaded to the brim with ammunition or gasoline. The math, I'll admit, made sense, but only if you'd never seen America at work. The Germans thought like soldiers. We were thinking like a nation of factories. To them, logistics was a limit. To us, it was the engine. Still. That night the rumour got under our skin. You could feel it in the way men spoke less, the way their eyes kept drifting toward the gas cans strapped to the sides of the trucks. I remember the air thick with exhaust and tension, the radio hissing out German voices bragging about how Patton would soon grind to a halt. I stared at the dashboard light flickering across my hands and thought, if their math's right, my life means nothing. But if it's wrong, I'll prove it with every mile I drive. The next morning before dawn, engines started up again. Coughing, roaring, steady. Whatever doubts we had burned off with the first plume of diesel smoke. We weren't out to make speeches or prove theories. We just kept driving, one gear, one truck, 1 mile at a time, daring those German numbers to keep up. We'd been driving for weeks before the story of Le Mans finally reached us. It came down the line like a legend told in whispers at fuel stops. They said Lieutenant Colonel Laurent Ayres had gathered the brass in a French chateau lit by candles and map lamps. He pointed to a wall covered in chalk and pins, the words Red Ball scrawled in red across France. Then he said it plain. 12,500 tons a day, 140 truck companies, 5,958 trucks, convoys every 5 minutes, 35 miles an hour average, repair crews every 50 miles, no exceptions. No one spoke. The men in that room knew those numbers didn't belong in any rule book. They were orders from another world, a world powered by American factories instead of fear. We heard how Ayres finished his briefing, closed his notebook, and walked straight out into the rain without another word. When our officers told us about it later, they still looked shaken, like they'd been in church and seen a miracle too big to name. Sitting on my truck's bumper that night, I tried to picture it. A map glowing under lamplight, chalk dust in the air, men staring at a plan that sounded like madness. Yet those same figures, 12,500 tons, 5,958 trucks, 140 companies, were now the rhythm of our days. The math wasn't theory anymore. It was the hum of engines and the burn of gasoline in my lungs. That was when it hit me. This wasn't just a temporary fix to keep Patton moving. It was a machine, a living one, built out of every truck, every driver, every mile. We weren't improvising anymore. We were manufacturing victory, one load at a time. The Germans had engineers. We had production lines on wheels. I used to think of myself as just another driver with a dirty uniform and a sore back. But when I heard those numbers, really heard them, I stopped being afraid. I wasn't just a man behind a wheel. I was a cog in America's machine, and that machine was unstoppable. The gas pedal trembled under my boot as the convoy rolled east for the first time. It was just past midnight, and the road ahead shimmered under the glare of thousands of headlights. Dust hung in the beams like smoke. Kids from the nearby villages stood along the roadside waving at us with the kind of smiles you don't forget. On the side of my truck I'd painted in red letters, Patton's Blood Bank. Some guys wrote Detroit to Berlin Express or Hitler, here we come. It was our way of reminding ourselves what we were doing this for. We drove 20 hours a day, lights blazing straight through the night, convoy after convoy, 5,000 trucks on the road at any given time. They said the average speed had to be 35 miles an hour. Anything slower and you'd be pulled out by the MPs. I kept my foot steady, eyes fixed on the taillights ahead that danced like fireflies in a storm. Sleep wasn't part of the plan. Coffee and adrenaline were enough. The first few hours felt endless. Mud spraying up the windshield, rain hissing on the hood, the engine growling like a living thing. When enemy artillery echoed far off in the distance, we didn't flinch. We just tightened our grip on the wheel. We'd learned fast that if you stopped, you were a target. Every few miles we'd pass a maintenance crew waving us through, their floodlights slicing through the dark as they patched up the wounded trucks. The air was thick with exhaust and courage. I remember looking down at the speedometer needle shaking around 35 and thinking, if this is the pace America needs, then that's the rhythm I'll keep. The convoy stretched for miles, an unbroken river of steel and light pouring east toward the front. You could see the glow of it from the hills. Some French farmer said it looked like the Milky Way had fallen to earth. Maybe they were right. For me, it was the sound that stuck, the steady drone of engines blending into one endless heartbeat. At any moment, 5,000 trucks were on the road, each one running 1.5 trips a day. That's what it took to keep Patton's tanks moving, to keep the war itself in motion. Somewhere ahead, men were fighting with the fuel we carried. Somewhere behind, more trucks were already loading up. I realized then that the noise around me wasn't chaos. It was order, mechanical, relentless, alive. That engine under my feet didn't just belong to my truck. It was the heartbeat of a whole country, and as long as it kept pounding, we'd never stop. Some nights the sky above us glowed brighter than our own headlights. German flares drifted down like slow-burning moons, lighting up the road for miles. I could see every truck ahead of me, silver under the firelight, moving steady, never stopping. We all knew they were watching us. German spotters on the ridge lines, aircraft circling somewhere beyond the clouds. But nobody let up on the gas. The rule was simple. Keep moving, keep shining. The first time I saw those flares, I expected the shelling to follow. It never did. Maybe they were too stunned to pull the trigger. Later we heard from intelligence that German observers were sending reports back in disbelief. Continuous column 20 kilometers long, 1,000 vehicles per hour, no blackout discipline. General Feuchtinger himself wrote, "This is not military science, it is mass production." That line stuck with me. Mass production. That was exactly what it was. Not tactics, not camouflage, just raw, unstoppable motion. The Germans had spent years perfecting the art of hiding. We had turned visibility into a weapon. From my seat, the world beyond the windshield looked like a river of white fire. Every truck mirrored the next, same model, same sound, same rhythm. If one stalled, it was shoved off the road, swallowed by the glow behind it. The headlights reached so far ahead that the horizon itself seemed to move. I remember glancing up through the glass and seeing the faint outline of a German reconnaissance plane, circling like a moth above a furnace. Maybe the pilot was wondering how you fight an enemy that refuses to disappear. The air was thick with heat and exhaust, my hands slick with sweat on the wheel. Still, I couldn't help but feel something close to pride. We weren't hiding anymore. We were announcing ourselves to the night. 6,000 engines roaring together didn't sound like war. It sounded like industry, like the pulse of a country too vast to comprehend. I thought about the men watching us from those dark hills, about how their whole idea of warfare was collapsing before their eyes. For them, an army meant precision, silence, secrecy. For us, it meant abundance, speed, light. When another flare burst overhead, I didn't flinch. The whole landscape turned white, and for a moment I could see hundreds of trucks stretching to the horizon, each one blazing like a forge. We weren't ghosts in the dark. We were the storm itself. We didn't hide. We overwhelmed. Coffee went cold before you could drink it. Bread turned hard before you could chew it. But the engines, those never cooled. The first week of the Red Ball felt like living inside a machine that never slept. From August 25th to the 31st, we moved 89,939 tons of fuel, ammunition, and rations, an average of 12,848 tons every single day. Each round trip ran about 686 miles, but no one talked in miles anymore. We counted time in coffee cups and engine hours. The trucks ran 20 hours a day, stopping only long enough to refuel or fix what broke. By the second day, we'd burned through 300,000 gallons of gas, just to keep the supply line itself alive. The thought of it would have made any German logistician faint. We were burning fuel to move fuel, wearing out trucks to keep tanks running, but the math didn't matter. What mattered was motion. I remember gripping the wheel until my hands cracked, eyes stinging from diesel fumes and dust. Every few miles we'd pass a broken truck, hood up, steam hissing, driver cursing. If it couldn't be fixed in 15 minutes, the rule was simple: push it into the ditch and move on. Somewhere behind us the mechanics would strip it for parts under the glow of floodlights. Around 1,800 vehicles broke down every day that week, and somehow the line never slowed. The repair crews were magicians: 15 minutes to patch an axle, 45 to swap an engine. They slept where they stood, wrenches still in their hands. By midweek, the road itself seemed to breathe, convoys pulsing east and west like a living artery. From the cab, I could feel the rhythm of it: gears grinding, engines humming, tyres drumming the same beat over and over. We weren't just driving trucks anymore. We were keeping time for an entire army. Every turn of the wheels was another heartbeat in something far larger than any of us. I caught glimpses of other drivers through their windshields, faces pale under dashboard light, jaws set, eyes hollow but burning. We didn't talk much, just nodded when our paths crossed. Words took too much energy. Somewhere between exhaustion and duty, we'd become part of a single body, one that refused to stop. By the end of that first week, the numbers coming down from command didn't sound real. 89,939 tons delivered, 686 miles round trip, 300,000 gallons consumed daily, 800 trucks repaired or abandoned. And yet, we'd done it. I looked at my cracked hands and grease-stained sleeves and thought, we're trading sleep for miles, and miles for freedom. The engines thundered back in answer, never resting, never hesitating, as if the whole country was pushing us forward through the night. Fuel was our lifeblood, and it never stopped flowing. Every 25 miles another depot rose out of the dust, rows of drums stacked like walls, tankers lined up under canvas nets, hoses coiled across the ground like veins feeding the front. We refueled fast, 10 minutes per truck if you were lucky. There was always another driver waiting, another set of hands ready to pump. The air smelled of gasoline day and night. Even the rain carried it. Somewhere beneath the English Channel, an undersea pipeline called Pluto, pipeline under the ocean, was quietly pushing fuel straight from Britain to France. We never saw it. but we felt its presence every time our engine started without hesitation. It was the invisible heartbeat that kept the Red Bull alive. The Germans couldn't grasp how we stayed supplied. One of their officers wrote, "They have fuel depots larger than our entire reserves." He wasn't exaggerating. From the sky, our routes must have looked like rivers of fire feeding an endless furnace. But fuel meant danger too, and it came fast when it came at all. I still remember the day Private Booker T. Washington was hit near Alençon. The shell tore through his tank, flames bursting out behind him like a comet tail. He could have jumped, any sane man would have, but he didn't. He kept driving, steering that burning truck straight toward a field hospital loaded with medical supplies. When he reached the tents, the cab was a firebox. He leapt out as it exploded, barely alive, but the supplies were saved. Weeks later, when someone asked why he hadn't jumped, he said simply, "I wasn't about to let that fire beat me." That story spread through every convoy like scripture. We all knew that smell, the sharp sting of burning gas in the air. Sometimes driving through the night, you'd see a distant glow on the horizon and wonder which truck it was this time. But fear wasn't what we felt. It was something fiercer. Every drop of fuel, every spark, every engine roar meant momentum, and momentum was life. I used to think the heat in that cab came from the engine, but it wasn't. The real fire burned in our chests. When the flames licked the steel and the night turned red, I could still feel it there, hotter than anything outside. We carried both the fuel and the fire, and neither ever ran out. Out here, things broke faster than we could count, but somehow everything still worked. Engines died, axles snapped, tires blew, and yet the convoys kept rolling. We didn't wait for orders. We fixed what broke and moved on. The rule was simple. If it couldn't be repaired in 15 minutes, push it off the road. But more often than not, we fixed it. I once saw a crew swap out an entire engine in 45 minutes using a mobile crane. No manuals, no blueprints, just muscle and know-how. They didn't even shut the road. Trucks kept rumbling past as wrenches clanged and sparks flew. When parts ran short, we turned into scavengers. Dead trucks on the roadside became donors. Engines, axles, even steering wheels ripped out under lantern light. We called it organ donation, and it kept us alive. One night near Chartres, we ran out of trucks altogether. The solution? We commandeered abandoned German vehicles, painted them olive drab, and put them right back in the convoy. The enemy's machines were now working for us. That was the American way. If something didn't exist, we built it. If it broke, we fixed it before breakfast. In less than 3 months, our engineers threw up 40 temporary bridges, carved detours out of bomb craters, and set up 26 major maintenance depots. 15 giant fuel dumps dotted the route, each glowing at night like a refinery. And for the drivers who never stopped, they built what we called truck cities, 8 massive rest and refit camps where you could grab a shower, a bite, and 5 hours of sleep before heading back out. My favourite story from those days happened at Monte, where the Germans had blown a bridge the size of a cathedral. Their engineers figured it would take 6 weeks to replace. Ours did it in 14 hours. While convoys detoured 8 miles around, combat engineers threw up a Bailey Bridge under floodlights, the sound of hammers echoing through the night. By morning, the trucks were crossing again like nothing had happened. You could drive past a field one night and see nothing but rubble, come back the next day and there'd be a fuel depot, a repair station, or a whole new bypass road. We didn't plan for weeks, we just acted. The Germans had committees, we had crowbars, they had procedures, we had results. I think that's what scared them most. Every night, somewhere along that 700-mile stretch, a miracle happened. A bridge, a repair, a road rising out of ruins, but nobody stopped to write it down. We didn't have time for headlines or history. We just worked, greasy, half awake, running on coffee and stubborn pride. When I think back on it now, I realize those nights were America at its purest, improvised, relentless, and impossibly fast. Every fix was temporary, every solution half mad, but somehow it all held together. Night after night, the Red Bull kept moving, built on the backs of men who refused to wait for perfect plans. Out there, every dawn meant proof that even chaos could be engineered. Out here, things broke faster than we could count, but somehow everything still worked. Engines died, axles snapped, tyres blew, and yet the convoys kept rolling. We didn't wait for orders. We fixed what broke and moved on. The rule was simple. If it couldn't be repaired in 15 minutes, push it off the road. But more often than not, we fixed it. I once saw a crew swap out an entire engine in 45 minutes using a mobile crane. No manuals, no blueprints, just muscle and know-how. They didn't even shut the road. Trucks kept rumbling past as wrenches clanged and sparks flew. When parts ran short, we turned into scavengers. Dead trucks on the roadside became donors, engines, axles, even steering wheels ripped out under lantern light. We called it organ donation, and it kept us alive. One night near Chartres, we ran out of trucks altogether. The solution? We commandeered abandoned German vehicles, painted them olive drab, and put them right back in the convoy. The enemy's machines were now working for us. That was the American way. If something didn't exist, we built it. If it broke, we fixed it before breakfast. In less than 3 months, our engineers threw up 40 temporary bridges, carved detours out of bomb craters, and set up 26 major maintenance depots. 15 giant fuel dumps dotted the route, each glowing at night like a refinery, and for the drivers who never stopped, they built what we called truck cities. 8 massive rest and refit camps where you could grab a shower, a bite, and 5 hours of sleep before heading back out. My favourite story from those days happened at Monte, where the Germans had blown a bridge the size of a cathedral. Their engineers figured it would take 6 weeks to replace. Ours did it in 14 hours. While convoys detoured 8 miles around, combat engineers threw up a Bailey Bridge under floodlights, the sound of hammers echoing through the night. By morning, the trucks were crossing again like nothing had happened. You could drive past a field one night and see nothing but rubble. Come back the next day, and there'd be a fuel depot, a repair station, or a whole new bypass road. We didn't plan for weeks, we just acted. The Germans had committees, we had crowbars, they had procedures, we had results. I think that's what scared them most. Every night, somewhere along that 700-mile stretch, a miracle happened. A bridge, a repair, a road rising out of ruins, but nobody stopped to write it down. We didn't have time for headlines or history. We just worked, greasy, half awake, running on coffee and stubborn pride. When I think back on it now, I realize those nights were America at its purest, improvised, relentless, and impossibly fast. Every fix was temporary, every solution half mad, but somehow it all held together. Night after night the Red Bull kept moving, built on the backs of men who refused to wait for perfect plans. Out there, every dawn meant proof that even chaos could be engineered. At night, the road sang. You could hear it miles away. The low growl of engines, the steady pulse of 6,000 trucks grinding east through mud and rain. To us, it was the sound of work, of duty, of another night survived. But to the Germans, it was something else entirely. They said they could hear us all night, every night. I heard the rain. They heard the sound of despair. Their soldiers counted our engines like ghosts, each one a reminder that we never ran out, of fuel, of bullets, of men. Some reports said German riflemen had 3 rounds apiece while our trucks carried millions. That imbalance had a sound to it, a roar that didn't stop. Field Marshal Manteuffel wrote that we were not fighting an army but a civilization. Model said, they don't fear us because they have infinite resources. Maybe they were right. Our noise was our message. We didn't hide because we didn't have to. The Red Bull Express had become the loudest weapon in the war. I remember one night near Metz, when the rain turned the highway into a river of light. Headlights reflected off the puddles, and the sound rolled across the valleys like thunder. Somewhere in the darkness, German lines listened to that endless growl and knew they couldn't match it. The Luftwaffe tried to find us, but even when the sky was clear, they couldn't tell where one convoy ended and another began. Later, when we rested during the day, the psychological warfare units took over. They set up loudspeakers near the front and played recordings of our convoys, engine sounds, gear shifts, horns, for hours. The Germans called them ghost convoys. Units reported hearing trucks that weren't even there. Some surrendered thinking they were surrounded. The truth was the sound itself had become a weapon. It broke through more than air. It broke through morale. I can still hear that rhythm now, years later. The rumble under the tyres, the hiss of wet brakes, the echo of thousands of engines rolling through the French night. To us, it meant life, motion, victory. To them, it meant the end. It wasn't the size of our army that crushed them. It was the certainty in our sound. Every roar said, "We're still coming." Every gear shift said, "We're not done yet." When dawn broke and the engines finally quieted, the silence itself felt strange, almost wrong. Because for those few hours each night, the Red Ball Express didn't just move supplies, it moved the war itself. And for the men listening in the dark, it wasn't the shells or the tanks that broke their will, it was the sound. Some men fought with rifles, we fought with engines, and some of us never made it back. The Red Ball Express was a river of steel and coffee that never slept, but the cost was paid in silence. Around 300 drivers died on that road, burned, crushed, or simply driven past the edge of exhaustion. There were no medals for them, no parades, just their names written in grease-stained logs and remembered in the hum of the next engine that took their place. Our trucks lived hard and died young, 10,000 miles on average before being stripped for parts. A peacetime truck could last 3 times that. But this wasn't peace. Every day, about 30% of our vehicles went down. Blown tyres, broken axles, shot transmissions. 500 engines replaced every week. 10,000 tyres burned through in the same span. More than 5,000 trucks were lost altogether. Abandoned, cannibalized, or burned on the roadside. Yet the convoys never stopped. If one truck failed, another filled the gap before the dust settled. I can still see it in my mind. A wrecked deuce and a half smoking in the ditch, its driver's helmet resting on the fence post beside it. No ceremony, no words. The rest of us just downshifted and kept moving. That was the job. The road didn't wait for grief. The smell of diesel and rain mixed with something heavier. A silence that only men running on caffeine and stubborn will could understand. We drank coffee so strong it could strip paint, ate cold rations with shaking hands, and drove until the headlights blurred into stars. Some nights I'd catch myself talking to the truck, begging her to hold together for just one more hill. Sometimes she did, sometimes she didn't. But we learned something out there, that steel and men aren't so different. Both bend under pressure, both crack when pushed too far, and both can surprise you with how much they can take before breaking. When I look back now, I don't remember who was black or white, north or south. Out there under the same mud and oil, we were all the same colour. The Red Ball didn't care where you came from. It only asked one thing: keep rolling. Those we lost became part of the road itself, folded into the miles we conquered. I still think about them when I hear the hum of an old truck engine, because out there, under the grime and the grit, every man was made of the same stuff: steel, sweat, and coffee. Back then, I never thought pressing the gas pedal was like firing a shot that travelled 60 miles ahead. But that's what it was. Every turn of the wheel, every tank of fuel we delivered was a weapon that kept the war moving. Patton's tanks didn't just roll, they flew, 40 to 60 miles a day on average, sometimes more. On September 1st, 1944, the 4th Armoured Division advanced 67 miles in a single day, numbers no German planner believed possible. They thought we'd run out of fuel, but we drowned them in it instead. By the time the Red Ball shut down after 82 days, we had delivered 412,193 tons of supplies across 122 million ton miles. Nearly 6,000 trucks ran every day, 7,000 at the peak, driven by 23,000 men, 3/4 of them African American. Most of us never saw a medal or a headline, but together we kept an army alive. They said it cost $100 million. That sounded impossible until you realized each day of war cost America $250 million. The Red Bull paid for itself by shortening the war by 6 months and helping capture 400,000 German prisoners along the way. I remember hearing how our planes joined the effort too, C-47 transports flying 900 missions a day by mid-September, dropping 2,700 tons straight to the front lines. The sky and the road worked together like twin arteries feeding one body. The Germans didn't understand it then, but we were showing them something new, that logistics wasn't support, it was strategy. Every mile we drove turned steel and oil into momentum. Every convoy that reached Patton's tanks meant another breakthrough, another German retreat. We didn't just move supplies, we moved history forward. Sometimes, standing by my truck after a long haul, I'd look at the dust trail fading into the horizon and think how far it all reached, One man's truck feeding another man's gun, one drop of fuel pushing an entire army. People like to talk about tanks, planes, generals, but I'll tell you the truth. The war moved on wheels. Those trucks were the real front line. The Germans had their panzers, we had our deuces, and that made all the difference. In the end, it wasn't tactics that won. It was movement. Endless, unstoppable, tireless movement. When Patton's armour reached the German border, we drivers knew we'd done our part. Our wheels had carried more than cargo. They'd carried a nation's will. They had turned American industry into velocity, and velocity into victory. They had proven that in modern war the side with more trucks wins. The Red Ball Express ended on November 16, 1944, but the road never really stopped. When the convoys dissolved, the trucks were reassigned, the depots emptied, and we drivers scattered back into a quiet world that suddenly felt too still. For the first time in months, the engines went silent, and the silence felt wrong. I went home and became a long-haul trucker. A lot of us did. America was building highways now. Wide, endless, made for speed, and every mile reminded me of France. The smell of asphalt, the hum of tyres, the rhythm of the road. It was the same song we'd played across Europe, only without the fear of shell fire. The Red Ball didn't just win a war. It built a nation that knew how to move. The veterans of those convoys went on to found trucking companies, design interstate routes, and turn the lessons of war into the arteries of peace. They had learned that volume beats efficiency, that speed beats perfection, and that if you keep trucks rolling 24 hours a day, you can move the world. 50 years later, in 1994, the US Postal Service issued a stamp to honour the Red Ball Express. I still remember standing in line to buy one. Small, simple, showing a deuce and a half charging down a muddy road. Not many people at the counter knew what it meant, but I did. General Patton once said, "The truck drivers of the Red Ball Express deserve as much credit for victory as any combat unit." I used to think he was just being kind, but now I understand. Every ton we hauled, every mile we drove, was a shot fired in that war. We didn't have monuments, but we had the road. That was our memorial. Sometimes, when I'm driving down an interstate at night, I catch the reflection of my headlights stretching ahead and think of those days, the glow of 1,000 trucks in the French dark. The war ended, but the road kept going, carrying America forward. We weren't heroes in uniforms polished for parades. We were men of steel and coffee, turning wheels in the mud until victory came. We didn't build statues, but the highways belonged to us. Every mile shortened the war, every gallon saved a life.